My wife Jenna and I were exhausted from months of work without any sort of vacation, so we booked a cabin deep in the woods for a week-long getaway. It was described as remote, perfect for relaxation, and exactly what we needed. The drive out there was long, with the last few miles on a narrow dirt road through a thick forest. When we finally arrived later that night, the cabin sat alone, surrounded by massive trees with no sign of neighbors. Complete isolation. It was massive and definitely at least a few decades old. As we unpacked, I admired how cozy the place felt. It had a large stone fireplace, a loft bedroom, and windows that looked over a thick forest. That first evening, we settled in, cooked a simple dinner, and enjoyed the silence of the woods. But by the second day, I discovered something odd. While grabbing a broom from the pantry, I noticed the corner of the rug that was bunched up, revealing a ring handle. Curious, I pulled back the rug, uncovering a trap door. I called Jenna over to come look. It was definitely a bit strange and made us both nervous, but we decided to open it up and explore. A set of old wooden stairs led down to the darkness. We grabbed the flashlight and went down. The air grew colder as we reached the basement, which was small and covered with old furniture and boxes. It was extremely dark and dusty, and I hated every second we spent standing there just looking around. We noticed strange markings on the dirt floor, drag marks that led up to a bricked up section of the wall. It felt creepy, so we quickly went back upstairs, closing the trapdoor behind us. We went on with the rest of our day like usual, going on a few hikes in the surrounding area and watching a movie during the evening. That night, though, something strange happened that made me immediately feel creeped out again. Lying in bed, we heard thumps from below, as if someone was hitting the wooden steps with a heavy object. The sounds happened randomly, but were loud enough to keep us awake. I tried to reassure Jenna it was probably just the house settling, but even I didn't believe that. The noises continued, growing louder as time went on. It was clear we wouldn't be able to sleep while this was happening. It wasn't just thumping anymore. Now there was a scratching sound, like nails on wood. Unable to ignore it any longer, I went to the pantry, Jenna right behind me, both of us needing to know what was happening. With the flashlight in my hand, I pulled back the rug and opened the trapdoor. The noise stopped abruptly. I shined the light down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I was absolutely terrified, but knew I needed to face what was ever down there. After all, maybe it was just a rat or something else harmless. As I reached the bottom, my flashlight lit up the bricked up wall. But this time, there was a small hole in the bricks, just big enough for an eye to peek through. That definitely wasn't there earlier. I decided to look through and see what was on the other side. That's when I saw it, something that still haunts me to this day. An eye staring back at me. I screamed and yelled at Jenna to run upstairs and lock herself in our bedroom. As she ran up, I shouted at the wall, asking who was there, but the only response was a low moan that made my heart sink. That terrifying sound made me sprint upstairs as fast as possible. I slammed the trapdoor closed and dragged the coffee table above it. I ran upstairs to grab Jenna, and we quickly grabbed our stuff before running out of the house and into our car. I called the cabin rental service and the police immediately, explaining to both what happened as best as I could while my heart was still beating out of my chest. A few days later, the police did some digging and called me back. They destroyed the brick wall and saw something horrifying. A tiny bedroom with musty sheets and scattered food cans everywhere. There was no person in sight though, and he must have left through a different small trapdoor that the police found on the back of the cabin. Whoever was there was probably harmless and just trying to grab some of our food at night, but he could have wanted something much more sinister. I'm glad we got out of there okay. Last year, my buddy Jake and I decided to take a trip to an island known for its beautiful beaches and massive jungles. It was a small, barely inhabited place, which we thought would be perfect for a week of fishing and unwinding away from our busy jobs. we rented a small cottage on the beach, the only one available on the island, according to the rental agency. It was pretty old, with a torn up roof and thick bamboo walls, and it sat right on the sand, with the ocean just a few feet from our doorstep. The first couple of days were exactly what we hoped for. We spent our time swimming, sunbathing, enjoying cold beers by the sea. The island felt like our private paradise. But by the third night, things started to feel off. It began with an odd sensation of being watched. At first, we joked about it, blaming it on the isolation and maybe a few too many drinks. But then, one night, I heard something. Footsteps and movement in the bushes outside. I was definitely creeped out, but I thought it was just a deer and went back to sleep. After talking about what happened the next morning, we tried to brush it off as the wind or maybe animals in the woods by our cottage. But the feeling of being creeped out just grew stronger as the days passed. One night, the noises were louder than ever, and we decided to check it out outside for ourselves. We grabbed flashlights and stepped outside, scanning the darkness. After looking around for a few minutes, we didn't see or hear anything that was out of place. So I was about to walk back inside. Jake yelled at me to come over to where he was standing at the back of the house. That's when we saw something horrifying. Right in front of us, there were footprints in the sand, leading up to our windows and then back into the jungle. They were too large and deep to belong to any animal. Terrified, we decided to follow them, needing to know if someone else was on this island with us. The tracks led us deeper into the jungle, to a part of the island we hadn't explored before. The trees and bushes grew thicker as we walked, and after a few minutes we were tired and ready to turn back. Just as we were about to leave though, we saw something ahead of us. The footprints stopped at a small clearing. In the middle was an old, beat-up shack, covered in vines and half collapsed. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. Jake wanted to turn back, but I told him that we've come too far to back off now. I grabbed a big stick next to me for protection. Curious and nervous, we approached the shack. As we got closer, we heard a noise. Whispers coming from inside. I couldn't tell what they were saying. My heart raced as we stood at the front door. Finally building up the courage, I shined my flashlight inside. That's when I saw him. A man, hunched over in the corner of the shack. He was dirty, his clothes ripped, and he looked up at us with wild eyes. He didn't say anything, just stared at us, and then, without warning, he lunged towards us, screaming wildly. I swung my stick at the man, and Jake grabbed him and threw him to the ground violently. Just as he fell over, we ran as fast as we could back to the cottage. After what seemed like forever, we got back and locked ourselves inside. We stayed up all night watching the door and listening to the sounds outside. Multiple times we heard stomping and yelling in the woods behind our house, and we were both absolutely terrified. Once the sun finally rose, we grabbed our things and hurried to the boat we rented, not stopping until we reached the mainland. We reported what happened to the police, but when they went back to the island, they found the shack empty, the man gone without a trace. They told us he might have been a castaway or someone living off the grid, but nobody knew for sure. We haven't gone back to that island or any sort of remote trip since then. Sometimes, the idea of being alone isn't as good as it seems. My wife and I were excited for our vacation. We booked a cabin deep in the woods of Oregon, hoping for a peaceful getaway. We rented a car at the airport and drove through the winding forest roads until we reached the cabin. It was isolated but charming, with a cozy living room, a small kitchen, one bedroom, and one bathroom. We arrived in the late afternoon, so we decided to unpack and then head out for dinner. We found a small diner nearby and brought back some burgers to the cabin. After dinner, we watched a movie in the living room. My wife got up to get her phone from the kitchen, but when she returned, she looked worried. She swore she left her phone on the kitchen counter, but it wasn't there. We searched the whole cabin and finally found it on the bed in the upstairs bedroom. My wife accused me of moving it, but I hadn't touched it. We brushed it off as her forgetting where she put it. The next day, we spent the entire day hiking and exploring the nearby trails. We returned to the cabin exhausted and ready to relax. As soon as we walked in, I noticed something strange. The living room light was on. I was sure we had turned it off before leaving. My wife was starting to get scared, but I assured her that we must have just forgotten. We settled down to watch another movie. As I was turning on the TV and browsing Netflix, I heard her violently scream all of a sudden. I ran over to see what she wanted. She pointed at the floor where there were muddy footprints leading from the door to the bedroom. We both wore boots, but these prints were fresh, and we had wiped our feet when we came in. My wife was convinced someone had been in the cabin while we were out. I approached the bedroom and opened the door slowly. I entered and carefully checked every spot in the room, but no one was there. I checked the entire cabin, but the place was empty besides us. My wife was too scared to stay, so I called the owner of the cabin. He didn't answer, so I left a voicemail. We should have just left for the night, but it was already getting very late and we were both exhausted. We went to our bedroom and locked the door. Wanting to protect her, I stayed awake for as long as I could, but I think eventually I fell asleep. Around midnight, we heard a noise. It was like a soft thud, like someone moving around. My wife clutched my arm, terrified. I got up and listened carefully. The sound was coming from the living room. I slowly walked downstairs, with each step creaking below me. I crept out of the bedroom and peeked around the corner. There, in the dim light, I saw something horrifying. There was a man standing by the couch. He was holding something shiny in his hand, but I was too freaked out to distinguish what it was. I quietly backed into the bedroom and locked the door. My wife was already dialing 911. We whispered to the operator about what was happening, and they assured us help was on the way. The noises outside our door continued, and eventually we heard footsteps approaching. They stopped right outside our room and started banging on the door. My wife screamed, and I yelled at this person to leave us alone, but they didn't stop. After what felt like an eternity, we heard sirens approaching from the distance. The police arrived and burst into the cabin, catching the man by surprise. They arrested him, and apparently he was just some random man on a lot of drugs who had no idea what was happening. The cops found a makeshift bed not far from where our house was, so he must have been living there and coming into our house for food during the day. We never pressed charges, but that's the last time we're renting a cabin for a while.